My Colorado mountain wedding story. They said, just come and be quiet. I did, but I kept my $8. 2 million secret. To the morning light filtered through the sheer curtains of my modest mountain cabin, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors that Robert had installed with his own hands. 35 years ago, I stood before the antique mirror in my bedroom, smoothing the wrinkles from my navy blue dress with fingers that trembled slightly, not from age, but from the weight of what this day represented. Eleanor Patterson, age 68, staring back with eyes that had seen too much and forgiven too often. The dress wasn't expensive. I had found it at Nordstrom Rack for $67, marked down from $200, nothing flashy enough to embarrass anyone. Nothing plain enough to suggest I hadn't tried. The fabric felt substantial against my skin, a deep navy that complemented my silver hair, which I had had styled yesterday at the small salon in town. "You look lovely, Mrs. Patterson," Diane, the stylist, had said as she had pinned the last curl into place. "Special occasion? My daughter's wedding," I had replied, practicing the smile I had wear tomorrow. "How exciting. You must be over the moon." I had nodded and paid the bill, not trusting my voice to remain steady if I said more. Now, alone in my bedroom with the scent of pine drifting through the open window, I fastened my grandmother's silver locket around my neck. The metal was cool against my collarbone, and inside were 2 tiny photographs. One of Robert on our wedding day, young and hopeful in his only suit, and one of Sarah at age 5, Gap, toothed and grinning, her arms wrapped around my neck. The invitation to Sarah's wedding had arrived 3 weeks ago, not in the traditional cream envelope I had imagined, but as a digital file attached to an email with the subject line, "Wedding details, please confirm attendance." No phone call to share the excitement. No request for my input on flowers or music. Just coordinates for a mountain lodge and one line that had made my stomach clench with its casual dismissal. "Looking forward to having you there, Mom. Please just attend quietly, and let us handle all the arrangements." I would read that line 17 times before closing my laptop. Attend quietly, as if I were a child who might misbehave, an elderly relative who needed to be managed rather than celebrated. When had I become someone who required such careful handling? The answer came to me as I sat at my kitchen table that morning, watching snow dust the pine trees outside my window, and remembering the slow, almost imperceptible transformation of my relationship with my only child. It had begun 3 years ago, when Sarah first brought Derek home for Christmas. I had spent weeks preparing for that visit. The guest room had been cleaned and redecorated with new linens. I couldn't really afford. I had planned meals around Sarah's childhood favorites, stocking the pantry with ingredients for her grandmother's sugar cookies and the apple cinnamon pancakes she used to beg for on Sunday mornings. I had even bought a small Christmas tree for the guest room, decorating it with ornaments Sarah had made in elementary school. When they had arrived on Christmas Eve, Derek had stepped out of his silver BMW and surveyed my cabin with an expression I couldn't quite read. His eyes had lingered on the hand-carved wooden sign Robert had made for our porch, the mismatched outdoor furniture I had collected over the years, the patch of garden where I grew vegetables each summer. "Wow," he had said to Sarah, his voice carrying clearly across the crisp mountain air. "This is very authentic, very mountain living." Mountain living, the way he had said it, with that slight pause and inflection, had made it sound like a theme park attraction, rather than the home where I had raised his future wife. Sarah had laughed, a sound I had never heard from her before, brittle and apologetic. "Mom's always been very self-sufficient," she had said, as if my independence were a character flaw she needed to explain away. That first dinner had been excruciating in ways I was only beginning to understand. I had served the meal I had planned so carefully, prime rib with Yorkshire pudding, roasted root vegetables from my garden, and the chocolate silk pie that had been Sarah's favorite since childhood. Derek had eaten with the polite enthusiasm of someone sampling ethnic food at a cultural festival, complimenting the rustic charm of my cooking and asking if I had grown all the vegetables myself like a real pioneer woman. Mom's very hands. Sarah had explained when Derek seemed puzzled by my scratch approach to everything from bread to preserves. She has never been one for shortcuts. Shortcuts, as if caring enough to make things myself were a quaint anachronism rather than an expression of love. But it was the conversation I would overheard later that night that had truly marked the beginning of the end. I had gone to the kitchen for a glass of water, planning to read for a while before bed, when Derek's voice had carried through the thin walls of the guest room. "Your mom seems very sweet," he was saying, his tone carefully measured, "but we will need to think about boundaries going forward. My family is used to a certain level of sophistication. My mother throws parties for 30 people catered by Le Bernardin. My father's law firm represents Fortune 500 companies. They are not really equipped for what?" Sarah's voice had been smaller than usual. "For this," Derek had said, and I could hear the gesture he was making, encompassing my home, my life, everything I had built. "Look, I am not saying your mom isn't great, but we are building something different here, something bigger. And that means sometimes making difficult choices about who fits into that vision." There had been a long silence before Sarah responded, and when she did, her words had broken something inside me that I was still learning to live without. "I know," she had whispered. "I have been thinking the same thing. She doesn't really understand that I have moved beyond all this small-town stuff. She still sees me as the little girl who needed her for everything, moved beyond, past me, away from me." I would stood in my kitchen, glass of water trembling in my hand, listening to my daughter discuss me like a problem to be solved, a relic from a simpler time that no longer fit her sophisticated new life. The rest of that visit had been a careful dance of polite conversation and forced smiles. Derek had complimented my coffee and asked thoughtful questions about the local hiking trails. Sarah had helped with dishes and shared stories about her work at the Denver marketing firm where she would met Derek. But underneath it all, I had felt the subtle shift in our dynamic, the way Sarah deferred to Derek's opinions, the way she seemed to see me through his eyes, evaluating everything I said and did for potential embarrassment. When they had left after New Year's, Sarah had hugged me goodbye with the same careful affection she might show an elderly aunt she saw once a year. "Thanks for everything, Mom," she had said. It was really nice. Nice. The most generic, meaningless word in the English language that had been 3 years ago, and in the time since, I had watched my daughter slowly edit me out of her life. Not dramatically. Sarah wasn't cruel, but with the steady persistence of someone reshaping her story to fit a new narrative. The phone calls had become shorter and less frequent. Where once Sarah had called every Sunday to share the details of her week, now I was lucky to hear from her monthly. And those conversations felt scripted, full of general updates about work and weather, but empty of the intimacy we had once shared. The visits had stopped altogether after Derek proposed. There had been excuses, work obligations, travel plans, renovations on their Denver condo that made hosting impossible. When I had suggested visiting them, Sarah had demurred with vague mentions of busy schedules and cramped quarters. "It is not really set up for guests right now, Mom. The second bedroom is Derek's office, and you know how you feel about air mattresses with your back." I had never complained about air mattresses. In fact, I would slept on them countless times during Sarah's college years when I had driven down for her gymnastics meets or academic award ceremonies. But somehow, in Sarah's retelling of our history, I would become someone with physical limitations that made me difficult to accommodate. The engagement party had been the first clear signal of what was to come. I had learned about it through a Facebook post, a photo of Sarah and Derek surrounded by champagne glasses and beaming faces I didn't recognize, with a caption that read, "So grateful for all the love and support from our Denver family." Denver family. As if she had been adopted by this new circle of friends and colleagues. As if the woman who had raised her single-handedly after Robert's death didn't qualify for inclusion in her new definition of family. When I had called to congratulate her and ask about the party, Sarah had been dismissive. "Oh, that was just a tiny thing Derek's parents threw together. Very last minute. Mostly just people from work and some of Derek's college friends." You would have been bored out of your mind, Mom. Trust me, bored. Because apparently, I was no longer capable of making conversation with educated people, no longer interesting enough to hold my own in sophisticated company. The wedding planning had been even worse. Sarah had hired a professional planner, a woman named Victoria, who spoke in terms of vision boards and curated experiences. When I had offered to help with anything, flowers, music, catering, decorations, Sarah had thanked me politely and explained that Victoria had everything under control. It is all very coordinated, Mom. Very specific. Victoria says too many cooks spoil the broth, you know? But when Derek's mother had wanted to add her own touches, upgraded linens, imported wine, a string quartet instead of a DJ, somehow the too many cooks rule hadn't applied. The dress shopping had been particularly painful. I had assumed foolishly that Sarah would want me with her for such an important moment. When I had asked about going together, she had explained that she was planning to shop with Derek's mother and sister, along with her maid of honor. It is going to be a whole-day thing in Denver, she had said. Victoria recommended this boutique that specializes in mountain weddings. Very exclusive. I didn't think it would really be your scene, Mom. Not my scene. Because apparently wanting to help my daughter choose her wedding dress made me unsophisticated, embarrassing. I had seen the dress for the first time in the engagement photos posted on Derek's family's Facebook pages. Sarah looked radiant in flowing white silk, surrounded by women I would never met, all of them beaming, as if they had discovered her in the wild and adopted her as their own. The invitations had arrived by mail, addressed to Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, in formal script. Beautiful cardstock, elegant calligraphy, every detail perfect, except for the glaring omission of any acknowledgement that the bride had a family beyond Derek's. The wording was standard. Derek and Sarah request the honor of your presence. No mention of parents, no indication that anyone had raised these two successful young people or contributed to their journey to this moment. When other relatives had called to comment on the unusual wording, I had made excuses. Modern weddings are different, I had said. Young people like to do things their own way, but privately, I would understood the message. In Sarah's new narrative, her story began when she met Derek. Everything that came before, her childhood, her education, the sacrifices I had made to give her opportunities, was prologue to be skipped over as quickly as possible. The bridal shower invitation had been even more pointed. It had arrived via Sarah's college roommate, who had clearly been coached on what to say. Hi, Mrs. Patterson. I am coordinating Sarah's bridal shower, and she wanted me to reach out. It is going to be at Derek's family's country club, and the theme is sophisticated soiree. Sarah thought you might feel more comfortable sitting this one out, since you don't really know anyone, and it is going to be mostly conversations about careers and travel and that sort of thing. Careers and travel. As if I were too simple to understand such lofty topics, too provincial to contribute anything meaningful to sophisticated conversation. I would politely decline, claiming a conflict with a medical appointment I didn't have. But the final insult had come just last week in the form of a group text that included Sarah, Derek, and Derek's parents. I was apparently part of this family chain now, but only as a recipient of instructions rather than a participant in planning. Quick reminder about the wedding logistics, Derek had written. Mom doesn't need to participate in any of the formal family photos. We are keeping the wedding party shots clean and contemporary, and seating will have Eleanor toward the back, so the photographer can focus on immediate family without distractions. Distractions, that is what I would become in my daughter's life, a complication to be managed, an embarrassment to be minimized. Sarah had added her own message an hour later. Also, Mom, no need to worry about giving a speech or anything. We are keeping the toasts to just the wedding party and parents to maintain the flow of the evening. Parents. Derek's parents apparently, because I no longer qualified for that designation in Sarah's New World Order. I had stared at that message for a long time, sitting in my kitchen, with a cup of tea growing cold in my hands. Outside my window, A family of deer had wandered into my garden, and I had watched them graze peacefully among the vegetables I had planted with the same careful attention I had once devoted to every aspect of Sarah's life. When had love become such a burden? When had the depth of my caring transformed from blessing to embarrassment? The answer, I realized, lay not in any single moment, but in the accumulation of small betrayals, tiny erasures, the steady process by which Sarah had rewritten our history to fit her new image of herself. She needed to be someone who had pulled herself up by her bootstraps, who had achieved success through her own merit rather than her mother's sacrifices. She needed to be someone who belonged in Derek's world without qualification or explanation. And that meant I had to become someone she had moved beyond. I thought about the sacrifices I had made over the years, not just the financial ones, though those had been significant, but the smaller, daily choices that had shaped both our lives. The double shifts I had worked at the Rocky Mountain Resort, cleaning rooms and changing linens so Sarah could have the clothes and activities her classmates took for granted. The community college classes I had given up so I could attend her swim meets and choir concerts. The social life I had never developed, because every spare moment had been devoted to making sure Sarah had everything she needed to succeed. I remembered selling my wedding band when Sarah was 18, and her college scholarship had fallen short by $3,000. Robert had died 2 years earlier, leaving us with more love than money, and Sarah's freshman year tuition was due in a week. I had driven to the pawn shop in Denver without telling her, feeling the weight of that simple gold circle, the one Robert had saved for months to afford, as I handed it across the counter. "You sure about this, madam?" the clerk had asked, noting the way my hand trembled slightly as I signed the paperwork. "I have never been more sure of anything," I had replied. Sarah had never known about the ring. She had thought the tuition shortage had been resolved through financial aid, and I had never corrected that impression. On her graduation day, when she had walked across the stage to receive her degree in marketing, I had applauded from the audience with the same pride and joy I would have felt if I had been sitting in the front row wearing all my original jewelry. It hadn't mattered then. Her success had been my success, her opportunities the fulfillment of every dream I had had for her future. But somewhere along the way, Sarah had decided that acknowledging my role in her success made her achievements less impressive. She needed to be a self-made woman, someone who had earned everything through her own talent and hard work. She couldn't be someone whose mother had cleaned hotel rooms to pay for her swim lessons, who had pawned her wedding ring to cover tuition, who had driven 4 hours through snowstorms, just to watch her compete in college debate tournaments. That version of Sarah's story was too complicated, too real, too messy for the image she was cultivating. The letter from our family attorney had arrived 6 months after Robert's death, when I was still struggling to navigate the practical realities of widowhood. James Morrison had been Robert's friend since high school, the best man at our wedding, and the closest thing to a brother Robert had ever had. His law practice was small but respected, and he had handled all our legal affairs for 35 years with the care and attention of family. "Eleanor," he had said when I came to his office to discuss Robert's will, "I think you should sit down." Robert's construction business had been more successful than either of us had realized. His careful investments in local real estate, his early shares in several small tech companies that had grown beyond our wildest dreams, the life insurance policies he had maintained religiously, all of it had accumulated into an estate worth just over $8 million. Robert was very specific about his wishes. James had explained, spreading the documents across his mahogany desk. "Everything goes to you, with the understanding that upon your death, it will transfer to Sarah. But Eleanor, he also left you complete discretion over how and when to distribute any of it while you are alive." I had sat in that office, overwhelmed by numbers that seemed impossible, by the realization that Robert had somehow managed to secure not just my future, but Sarah's as well. He had been gone 6 months by then, but his final gift was still providing for the people he loved. "He wanted you to feel safe," James had said gently, "and he wanted Sarah to know she comes from strength." Strength, if only Sarah could see it that way. For months after learning about the inheritance, I had fantasized about surprising Sarah with a wedding gift that would change her life. Not the full inheritance that would come to her eventually, but something substantial enough to give her and Derek the freedom to pursue their dreams without financial worry. I would meet with James 3 times to set up the transfer papers. $4.5 million moved into a trust that would activate on Sarah's wedding day. It would be my gift to her new beginning. My way of saying that despite everything, I believed in her future and wanted to contribute to her happiness. The documents had been sitting in my bedroom drawer for 6 months, signed and notarized, waiting for the right moment. I had imagined slipping them to her privately after the ceremony, watching her face light up with surprise and gratitude, perhaps even pride that her mother had been able to provide such a blessing. But as I stood in my bedroom that morning, adjusting my navy dress and reading another dismissive text about keeping my presence low key, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. Not anger. Exactly. I had moved beyond anger weeks ago. This was something clearer, cleaner, a recognition of reality that I had been avoiding for 3 years. Sarah didn't want a mother at her wedding. She wanted a convenient prop, present enough to avoid obvious questions about family, but invisible enough not to interfere with the perfect image she was trying to project. I walked to my dresser and opened the second drawer, pushing aside the carefully folded handkerchiefs and old photographs to find the cream colored envelope containing the transfer papers. $4.5 million. More money than I had ever imagined having. More than enough to buy a house anywhere in the country, to travel the world, to ensure a comfortable future. I held the envelope in my hands, feeling its weight, not just the physical weight of paper and ink, but the emotional weight of hopes and dreams and a mother's love translated into legal documents. The envelope wasn't sealed. I had left it open so I could add a personal note at the last minute, something meaningful to mark this transition in our relationship. Now I wondered what that note might say. Dear Sarah, I hope this helps you build the life you want, even if that life doesn't include much room for me. Too bitter, congratulations on your wedding. May this gift help you and Derek create something beautiful together. Too generic, I love you enough to give you everything, including the freedom to be embarrassed by me if that is what you need. Too honest. In the end, I closed the envelope without adding anything at all. Some gifts speak for themselves, and some relationships have moved beyond words. The drive to Cascade Mountain Lodge took 45 minutes through winding roads, lined with aspen trees just beginning to turn gold with early autumn. I had made this drive hundreds of times over the years, to take Sarah to summer camp when she was 10, to attend her high school graduation party, to visit the resort where I had worked during her college years. Every curve in the road held memories of conversations we had had, songs we would sing together, moments when we had felt like an unbreakable team. Now I drove in silence, the radio off, my hands steady on the wheel despite the uncertainty churning in my stomach. The lodge itself was stunning, all timber and stone and floor, to ceiling windows that framed the mountain peaks like living art. Derek's family had money, old Denver money from real estate and banking, and they had spared no expense for this celebration. Ice sculptures flanked the entrance, their surfaces gleaming in the afternoon sun. Servers in crisp uniforms moved efficiently through the arriving guests, offering champagne and canap that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. I parked between a Mercedes and a Tesla, feeling suddenly conscious of my 10-year-old Honda Civic with its dinged bumper and faded paint. As I walked toward the entrance, I passed groups of guests laughing and embracing, clearly comfortable in this world of designer clothes and expensive accessories. Eleanor, oh my goodness, you look lovely. I turned to see Martha Hendricks, Sarah's former swim coach, approaching with a warm smile. Martha and I had spent countless hours together at swim meets over the years, bonding over early morning practices and the peculiar anxiety of watching your child compete. Martha, how wonderful to see you, I said, genuinely pleased to encounter a familiar face. I didn't know you were coming, Sarah asked me to officiate, Martha explained, beaming with pride. I am ordained online now, retirement hobby. She said she couldn't imagine anyone else marrying her. This was news to me. I had assumed they had hired a professional officiant, someone impressive and eloquent who fit their sophisticated image. The fact that Sarah had chosen Martha, practical, down-to-earth Martha, who had driven a school bus before becoming a swim coach, suggested there might still be some of the old Sarah left under all the polish. "That is wonderful," I said. "She always loved you." The feeling was mutual. That girl had more determination in her little finger than most people have in their whole body. "You raised a special one, Eleanor." The words warmed me more than I had expected. "Thank you, Martha. That means a lot." We chatted for a few more minutes about mutual acquaintances and Martha's retirement adventures. But I could sense her growing awareness that something was off about my role in the wedding. Other parents were bustling around with last-minute arrangements, checking with the wedding planner, greeting out-of-town relatives. I was standing alone in a parking lot, apparently uninvolved in any aspect of the day's logistics. "Well," Martha said finally, "I should go find Sarah and make sure she is not too nervous. Pre-ceremony, jitters and all that." "Of course," I agreed. "I will see you inside." But Martha hesitated, clearly wanting to say something more. "Eleanor, I hope you know how proud Sarah is of you. She talks about you all the time." I managed to smile. "That is sweet of you to say." "No, really. Just last month when we were planning the ceremony, she told me about all the sacrifices you made for her education. She said she wouldn't be where she is today without your support." The words hit me like a physical blow, not because they were cruel, but because they were kind. If Sarah had been talking about my sacrifices, thinking about my support, then why did I feel so completely excluded from this day? "Thank you, Martha," I said quietly. "I should let you go." Inside the lodge, I found my name on the seating chart, a beautiful calligraphic display flanked by mountain laurel and white roses, Eleanor Patterson, table 12. I scanned the chart quickly, noting the placement of various guests. Derek's parents and siblings were at table 1, directly in front of the head table. Sarah's college friends occupied tables 2 and 3. Derek's extended family filled tables 4 through 7. Co-workers and family friends were scattered through tables 8 through 11. Table 12 was near the back of the room, close to the kitchen doors. I made my way to the assigned table, navigating through clusters of guests who were clearly comfortable with each other, exchanging inside jokes and catching up on shared experiences. The table was set for 8, with elegant white linens and crystal glasses that caught the light from the massive chandeliers overhead. Only 2 other people were seated when I arrived. An elderly man I didn't recognize, and a woman about my age who looked vaguely familiar. "You must be Eleanor," the woman said, rising to shake my hand. "I am Patricia Chen, Derek's great aunt, and this is my husband Harold." "Nice to meet you," I replied, settling into my assigned chair. "So you are Sarah's mother," Patricia continued. "How exciting this must be for you. Your first child getting married?" "My only child," I corrected gently. "Oh, even more special then. Derek's mother was just saying how lovely Sarah is. Such a perfect match for Derek." I smiled and nodded, the response expected of me. "Patricia and I are the elderly relatives," Harold said with a chuckle. "The ones they have to invite but hope will stay quiet and not embarrass anyone." His wife swatted his arm playfully. "Speak for yourself. I plan to dance until they kick me out." The easy banter between them reminded me of the relationship Robert and I had shared. Comfortable, teasing, built on decades of shared experiences and private jokes. I felt a familiar pang of loss, not just for Robert, but for the version of myself that had existed when I was part of a couple, when I had someone who understood my references and laughed at my stories. The remaining seats at our table were filled over the next few minutes. A couple from Derek's law firm, polite and professionally friendly. Sarah's high school English teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, who greeted me warmly and asked about my health and retirement. A distant cousin of Derek's family, who seemed more interested in photographing his food than engaging in conversation. As the room filled with guests, I found myself studying the crowd, looking for signs of Sarah's history, evidence of the life she had lived before Derek. There were a few faces I recognized: her college roommate serving as maid of honor, a couple of friends from her childhood swim team, Martha preparing to perform the ceremony. But the overwhelming majority of guests were from Derek's world: his family, his colleagues, his college friends, his parents' social circle. It was as if Sarah had materialized, fully formed into their lives, with no history or connections of her own. The ceremony itself was beautiful, I had to admit. Sarah looked radiant walking down an aisle scattered with rose petals, her designer gown flowing behind her like something from a fairy tale. Derek waited at the altar, beneath an arch of white hydrangeas and mountain greenery, his face bright with genuine love and anticipation. Martha spoke beautifully about commitment and partnership, weaving in personal stories about Sarah's determination and Derek's kindness. The vows they had written were thoughtful and heartfelt, full of promises about building a life together and supporting each other's dreams. I watched from my seat in the back, applauding when everyone else applauded, standing when everyone else stood, smiling when the photographer turned toward the guests. But inside, I felt like I was watching a movie about strangers, a beautiful story that had nothing to do with me. During the processional, Sarah's eyes swept the crowd as she and Derek walked back down the aisle as husband and wife. She found Derek's parents in the front row and beamed at them. She spotted her college friends and gave them a little wave. She nodded to various relatives and family friends. Her gaze passed over me without stopping, without acknowledgement, as if I were part of the scenery rather than the woman who had raised her. The cocktail hour was an exercise in polite conversation and careful positioning. I stood near the windows that overlooked the mountain peaks, sipping white wine and watching clouds drift across the distant ridges. Groups of well-dressed guests clustered around high-top tables, their conversations a mixture of wedding excitement and social updating. Aspen this summer was absolutely divine, one woman was saying to a circle of listeners. We rented the most charming house right on the mountain. The views were to die for. We are thinking about Switzerland for Christmas, another guest added. Derek's family has connections at some fabulous resorts. Sarah is so lucky to be marrying into such a wonderful family. A third woman commented. Derek's parents are the most generous people. Did you know they are paying for the entire honeymoon? 3 weeks in Italy, all expenses paid. I took another sip of wine and turned back toward the mountains, letting the conversations wash over me like background music. This was Sarah's world now, a place where summers in Aspen and Christmas in Switzerland were casual topics of conversation, where generosity was measured in vacation destinations and wedding expenses. You must be Sarah's mother. I turned to find a woman in her 50s approaching, her pearl necklace catching the light from the chandeliers. She had the kind of polished appearance that spoke of regular salon appointments and personal shoppers. I am Patricia Morrison, Derek's aunt, she continued, extending a perfectly manicured hand. Sarah has told us so much about you, has she? I asked, curious what exactly Sarah had shared. Patricia's smile flickered slightly, as if she had realized she might have overstated. Well, she mentioned you live in one of those charming little mountain cabins. How rustic. Derek says you have been there for decades, 35 years. I confirmed. My husband built most of it himself. How authentic, Patricia said. The same word Derek had used about my Thanksgiving dinner 3 years ago. Derek's family has a place in Vail, but it is more of a contemporary design. Very modern. But there is definitely something to be said for the pioneer spirit. Pioneer spirit. As if I were a historical reenactor, rather than someone who had chosen to live simply and sustainably. Sarah seems to have adapted so well to city life. Patricia continued. Derek says she is a natural at entertaining. They threw the most elegant dinner party last month for some of Derek's business associates. Catered, of course. But Sarah has such an eye for presentation. Catered. I thought about the elaborate meals I had prepared for every birthday and holiday of Sarah's childhood. The way she used to stand on a step stool beside me, learning to fold dumpling wrappers and roll pie crust. When had cooking become something you hired other people to do, rather than an expression of love and creativity? That is wonderful, I said. Sarah always was creative. Oh yes. Derek's mother was just saying how refreshing it is to have someone in the family who understands that presentation is just as important as content. Sarah gets that in a way that is quite sophisticated for someone from. She trailed off, realizing she was about to say something potentially insulting. From a small town, I suggested helpfully. Well, yes. I mean, not that there is anything wrong with small towns. Of course, they have their charm. But Sarah has such a natural elegance about her now. You must be so proud, must be, as if pride were an obligation rather than an emotion. When dinner was announced, I made my way back to table 12, grateful for the familiar faces and the distance from the increasingly uncomfortable small talk. The meal was exquisite. Herb-crusted lamb with roasted vegetables and some sort of sauce I couldn't identify. The presentation was worthy of a 5-star restaurant, each plate arranged with artistic precision. I thought about the rehearsal dinner I had imagined hosting for Sarah, something simple and heartfelt in my own dining room, with homemade food and stories about her childhood, surrounded by people who had known and loved her throughout her life. It would have been rustic by these standards, authentic rather than sophisticated. But it would have been real. The speeches began during the salad course, and I found myself tensing as each speaker approached the microphone. Derek's father spoke about legacy and family traditions, welcoming Sarah into their circle of love and support. Derek's best man told stories about college adventures and European vacations, painting a picture of Derek as someone destined for success and happiness. Sarah's maid of honor shared memories of late night conversations in their college dorm, dreams about the future, and the moment Sarah had called to say she would met the one. Each speech was warm and personal, full of inside jokes and shared experiences. No one mentioned me. No one acknowledged the woman who had raised Sarah, who had sacrificed her own dreams, so Sarah could pursue hers, who had shaped the values and character that had made her worthy of Derek's love. It was as if Sarah's life had begun in college, as if everything that came before was irrelevant to the woman she would become. Then came the moment that changed everything. Not because it was unexpected, but because it crystallized everything I had been feeling for months into one sharp, unavoidable reality. The MC, a polished man with perfect teeth and the kind of practiced charm that came from years of working high-end events, stepped up to the microphone with a bright smile. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying easily across the room, "we would love to invite Sarah's family to share a few words. We are so honored to have Sarah's stepmother, Catherine, here with us tonight. Catherine has prepared a special toast to the happy couple." Stepmother, the word hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath and making my vision blur at the edges. I set down my fork with hands that had suddenly begun to tremble. Catherine Morrison, Derek's mother's sister, who had married Sarah's biological father 5 years ago, when Sarah was 27 years old, stood from the head table where she had been seated with the immediate family. She wore an elegant burgundy dress and the kind of confident smile that came from knowing you belonged exactly where you were. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Catherine said, her voice warm and practiced. "As someone who has had the incredible privilege of watching Sarah bloom into the remarkable woman she is today, I want to share what I have learned about love from witnessing her journey." Privilege of watching Sarah bloom. A woman who had known my daughter for 5 years was claiming the privilege of watching her become who she was. I thought about the night Sarah had called me crying because her college boyfriend had broken up with her via text message. I had driven 4 hours through a snowstorm to reach her campus, arriving at 2 a.m. to find her sobbing in her dorm room. We had stayed up until dawn, talking about heartbreak and resilience, and the kind of love she deserved. I thought about the summer she had worked at the local bakery, coming home each evening with flour in her hair and stories about the customers she would met. She had been saving money for a study abroad program, and I had matched every dollar she earned, proud of her work, ethic, and determination. I thought about teaching her to drive on the winding mountain roads, her hands gripping the steering wheel while I patiently guided her through each turn, celebrating the moment she finally felt confident enough to drive to town by herself. Stepmother. A woman who had entered Sarah's life when she was already an adult. Already formed. Already the person I had spent 27 years helping her become. Sarah has taught me that love isn't just about finding someone who makes you happy, Catherine continued, but about finding someone who challenges you to become the best version of yourself, someone who sees your potential and helps you reach it. The irony was almost unbearable. Catherine was describing exactly the relationship I had had with Sarah for the first 27 years of her life. The foundation I had built that had made her capable of the kind of love Catherine was celebrating. But somehow, in Sarah's new narrative, I had been erased from that story and replaced by a woman who had played no role in creating the person everyone was celebrating tonight. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor loud enough that several people at nearby tables turned to look. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady now, my mind clear in a way it hadn't been for months. "Excuse me," I said to my table mates, my voice calm and level. "I need some air." But instead of walking toward the exit, I found myself moving toward the front of the room, toward the microphone where Catherine was finishing her toast about love and growth and becoming the person you were meant to be. The room was large, filled with 200 guests, but my footsteps seemed to echo in the sudden quiet that fell as people noticed my approach. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Servers paused with trays balanced on their shoulders. Even the background music seemed to fade. Catherine noticed me first, her confident smile faltering as she recognized something in my expression. Not anger, exactly, but a kind of crystalline clarity that made her take a step back from the microphone. "Excuse me," I said, not to Catherine, but to the MC who was standing nearby with his practiced smile frozen in place. "I believe there has been a mistake." Sarah's face had gone completely pale. Derek rose from his chair, his mouth opening as if to speak, then closing again as he realized he had no idea what to say. I looked out at the crowd, 200 people in designer clothes and expensive jewelry, all of them staring at me with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern, to barely concealed irritation at having their elegant evening interrupted. These people knew nothing about the woman who had raised the bride. They knew nothing about the sacrifices, the love, the years of patient guidance that had created the person they were celebrating tonight. My voice carried clearly across the room, steady and calm despite the magnitude of what I was about to do. "I am Eleanor Patterson," I said, "Sarah's mother, her actual mother. The woman who stayed up all night when she had pneumonia at age 7, who taught her to ride a bike in the parking lot behind our cabin, who helped her with algebra homework at the kitchen table, and who sold her wedding ring to pay for college when the financial aid wasn't enough." The silence was complete. Now even the kitchen staff had stopped moving, servers frozen with plates in their hands as they processed what was happening. "I brought something for Sarah today," I continued, reaching into my purse with deliberate calm. A wedding gift I had been planning to give her privately. I pulled out the cream envelope, held it up so everyone could see. The paper seemed to glow under the chandeliers, substantial and official looking. $4.5 million, I said, letting the words settle over the room like snow. A transfer of funds I had prepared as a surprise, because I wanted my daughter to start her marriage without financial worry. Because despite everything, I believed in her future and wanted to contribute to her happiness. Gasps rippled through the crowd like wind through autumn leaves. Someone dropped a fork with a sharp clatter. Sarah's eyes went wide, her hand flying to her mouth. Derek was fully standing now, his face cycling through confusion, shock, and something that might have been calculation as he processed the number I had just announced. "But stepmother," I looked directly at Catherine, then at Sarah, then back at the crowd of strangers who had been celebrating my erasure. "Really?" I opened the envelope slowly, deliberately, giving everyone time to understand what was about to happen. The transfer documents were thick and official, bound with a blue legal ribbon, notarized and ready for execution. "You know what I have realized, Sarah?" I said, looking directly at my daughter, who was now standing behind the head table, her wedding gown pooling around her like spilled milk. "You don't need a mother. You don't want one. You want someone convenient to fill a role when it suits your narrative, but invisible enough not to interfere with the image you are trying to project." I began tearing the papers. The sound was sharp and final, cutting through the silence like breaking glass. "So if you don't need a mother, you certainly don't need her gift." Piece by piece, the documents fluttered to the floor. $4.5 million in confetti at my feet, each torn fragment representing years of love and sacrifice and hope for a future that would never come. Sarah moved around the head table, her wedding dress swishing against chairs and table legs as she rushed toward me. "Mom, wait, please. What are you doing?" "I am giving you exactly what you asked for," I said, my voice carrying to every corner of the room. "A mother who stays quiet and out of the way. A mother who doesn't embarrass you with her authentic cooking or her rustic lifestyle or her inappropriate emotions." I looked at the scattered papers at my feet, then back at my daughter, who was standing close enough now that I could see the tears starting to form in her eyes. "Enjoy your perfect wedding, sweetheart. Enjoy your stepmother and your sophisticated new family. I hope they give you everything you think you need." I turned and walked toward the exit, my heels clicking against the hardwood with the measured rhythm of someone who knew exactly where she was going. 200 people watched in absolute silence as I left my daughter's wedding reception, left the life I had devoted 32 years to building, left the person I had loved more than anything in the world to the family she had chosen to replace me. Outside, the mountain air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and the promise of early snow. I drove home through the gathering twilight, my windows down, breathing deeply for the first time in months. The next morning dawned clear and cold, with frost coating the pine trees outside my kitchen window, like sugar on a Christmas cake. I made coffee using the method Robert had taught me 38 years ago. Careful measurements, precise timing, the same ritual we had shared almost every morning of our marriage. As I stood at my kitchen counter, watching steam rise from my mug and listening to the familiar sounds of the mountain waking up around me, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 3 years. Peace, not happiness. Exactly. The events of the previous evening had been devastating in their finality, the end of dreams I had carried for decades. But underneath the sadness was something cleaner, something that felt like relief. I had spent 3 years trying to fit into a space that was never meant for me, accepting crumbs of attention from someone who had once been the center of my universe. I had allowed myself to be managed and minimized and gradually erased from the story of my own daughter's life. But last night, I had remembered something important. I still had a choice. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. "James," I said when my attorney answered. "It is Eleanor. I need to revise my will." There was a pause, the kind that comes from 40 years of friendship and professional discretion. James Morrison had been Robert's best man, had drawn up our first will when Sarah was born, had held my hand through the legal complexities of widowhood. "When would you like to come in?" he asked simply. As soon as possible. 2 days later, I sat in James's office overlooking the valley, autumn leaves painting the mountainsides in shades of gold and crimson that took my breath away. The original will lay spread across his mahogany desk, the document that left everything to Sarah upon my death, Robert's final expression of love for his family. "You are certain about this, Eleanor?" James asked, his pen poised over the revision forms. I thought about the question for a long moment, watching sunlight slant through the windows and illuminate dust motes dancing in the air like tiny spirits. "I am done rewarding people who don't value what they have," I said finally. "I am done giving away what hasn't been earned." The new will was simple in its clarity. The bulk of the estate, $7 million, would go to the Mountain Community Foundation, specifically their program supporting elderly women facing financial abuse or family abandonment. Women like me, who had given everything to ungrateful children and found themselves discarded when they were no longer useful. 1 million would go to my great-nephew Tommy, Margaret's grandson. He was 19, working 2 jobs to pay for community college, and he called me every few weeks just to check in. Last month, he had driven 6 hours to help me repair a section of roof damaged in a summer storm, refusing payment, and staying for dinner to hear stories about his grandfather. Sarah would receive exactly what she had given me in return for 32 years of devotion. Nothing. "What about a letter?" James asked, as I signed the final pages. "Something to explain your decision." I considered it for a moment, imagining what such a letter might say. How could I explain 30 years of love in a single document? How could I make someone understand the weight of small cruelties, the accumulation of tiny erasures that had led to this moment? "No letter," I said finally, "no explanation. She will understand, or she will not. Either way, it will not change anything." I signed the new will with the same steady hand that had signed report cards and permission slips and college applications for Sarah's benefit. When James handed me the sealed copy, he said something I would carry with me for the rest of my life. "Blood doesn't make family, Eleanor, love does. And love is a two-way street." I left his office feeling lighter than I had in years, as if I had set down a burden I had been carrying so long I had forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. The phone calls started 3 weeks later, beginning with Derek and escalating through various family members and mutual acquaintances as word spread about what I had done at the wedding. Derek called first, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Eleanor, we need to talk. Sarah's been devastated since the wedding. She says you are angry about how things were handled." I was making beef stew when he called, standing at my stove stirring vegetables and beef stock, the way Robert had taught me, slow and patient, and with attention to every detail. "I am not angry, Derek. I am clear." "Clear about what?" "About who values me and who doesn't. About what I am worth and what I am willing to accept." "Look, I know the wedding was stressful. Maybe some things were said that came out wrong." "Yes," I interrupted gently. "Things were said. Sarah introduced another woman as her stepmother. You called me a distraction in your family text messages, and for 3 years, you have both treated me like I was an obstacle to your perfect life, rather than the person who made that life possible." Silence stretched between us, filled with the sound of my wooden spoon against the pot and the distant call of ravens in the pine trees outside my window. "Eleanor, what Sarah meant when she said stepmother, what Sarah meant was exactly what she said. And I heard her. She wants to apologize. She wants to explain." "There is nothing to explain, Derek. You both showed me exactly who you are and what I mean to you. I am grateful for the clarity. The money you mentioned is no longer available. I have made other arrangements for my estate." Another pause, longer this time. When Derek spoke again, his voice had a different quality, sharper and more calculating. "Eleanor, you cannot just cut Sarah out of your will because you are upset about one day. She is your daughter. She deserves exactly what she has given me," I said, turning off the heat under my stew and leaning against the kitchen counter. "Nothing." I hung up before he could respond. Sarah called an hour later, her voice small and broken in a way I hadn't heard since she was a child. "Mom," the word came out as barely more than a whisper. "Please, can we talk?" I looked out my kitchen window at the familiar landscape of pine trees and mountain peaks, the view that had comforted me through decades of joy and sorrow, the place where I had raised my daughter and buried my husband and learned to live alone. "I am listening," I said. "I never meant to hurt you. The wedding was just. It was so overwhelming. Derek's family had all these expectations, and the wedding planner kept talking about image and presentation, and I was trying to make everything perfect for everyone. For everyone except me. No, that is not. I wanted you to be proud. I wanted everything to be beautiful and elegant, so you could see that your sacrifices weren't wasted, my sacrifices." I almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Sarah, my sacrifices were never meant to be displayed like trophies. They were meant to give you options, opportunities, the chance to build whatever life made you happy. I know that. I do. But Derek's world is so different from what I grew up with. And sometimes I felt like I had to choose between honoring where I came from and fitting into where I was going. And you chose to fit in. Silence. I am sorry, she whispered. I am so sorry, Mom. I know I handled everything wrong. I know I hurt you. But please don't let one terrible day destroy everything we have built together. It wasn't one day, Sarah. It was 3 years of treating me like I embarrassed you. 3 years of managing our relationship so it wouldn't interfere with your new image. 3 years of making me feel like my love was a burden rather than a gift. I could hear her crying now, soft sobs that reminded me of the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, seeking comfort in my arms. I love you, she said through her tears. You know I love you, don't you? I know you think you do. But love isn't something you turn on and off based on your audience. Love doesn't hide in the back row or get managed by wedding planners. Love doesn't introduce strangers as family, while treating family like strangers. It was one mistake. No, sweetheart. It was a choice you made over and over again for 3 years. And now I am making a choice too. What can I do? How can I fix this? I will do anything. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of 32 years of motherhood, of love given freely, and without condition, of dreams built around someone else's happiness. You cannot fix it. Some things, once broken, stay broken. Some words, once spoken, cannot be taken back. The money has nothing to do with this. The money was just the final message. The real issue is respect and dignity, and whether someone values what they have before they lose it. We sat in silence, 2 women connected by blood and history, but separated by choices that couldn't be undone. I love you, she said again, like a prayer or a plea. I love you too, but love without respect is just sentiment. And I am too old for sentiment. I hung up gently and turned off my phone. 6 months later, I sold the cabin. The decision hadn't been easy. That small mountain home held 35 years of memories. Every room filled with echoes of laughter and conversation, and the quiet intimacy of daily life, shared with people I loved. But living there had become like wearing clothes that no longer fit, carrying the weight of a life that was finished. I moved to Sunny Vista, a retirement community in Colorado Springs that specialized in active seniors who wanted independence with support nearby. My apartment was on the 3rd floor with a balcony, overlooking a community garden where residents grew vegetables and flowers in raised beds designed for easy access. It was smaller than my cabin, certainly, but it was also brighter and more manageable. More importantly, it was a place where I could be Eleanor Patterson rather than Sarah's mother or Robert's widow. Just me. Whatever that turned out to mean. The transition was easier than I had expected. My neighbors were friendly without being intrusive. People who had lived full lives and weren't looking to complicate their remaining years with unnecessary drama. We had morning coffee on the community patio, afternoon bridge games in the activity room, and evening conversations that ranged from politics to poetry to the grandchildren who called too rarely. You are the one who keeps her word, said Janet, the head nurse, after I had organized a successful book drive for the local elementary school. That is what everyone calls you. The nickname had started when I had volunteered to coordinate a weekly storytelling group for residents who wanted to share memories from their earlier lives. I had promised to show up every Tuesday at 2 p.m., and I had kept that promise through the flu season, a minor surgery, and 2 Colorado blizzards that had knocked out power for 3 days. Wordkeeper Eleanor. The residents started calling me. And somehow, that felt more like my real name than any I had carried before. The inheritance work began in earnest that fall. The Mountain Community Foundation was overwhelmed with gratitude when I explained what I wanted to do with Robert's legacy. They used the funding to establish a crisis support program for elderly women facing financial abuse or family abandonment. Situations I was learning were far more common than I had ever imagined. They named it the Robert Patterson Memorial Fund for Elder Dignity, and I attended the dedication ceremony with more pride than I had felt in years. Watching young social workers explain how the program would help women reclaim their independence after being discarded by their families, I felt Robert's presence as strongly as if he were standing beside me. This is what he would have wanted, I told the program director afterward. He always said the measure of a life was how much good it left behind. Tommy called every week to thank me and share updates about his studies. He was pursuing a degree in social work, inspired partly by what had happened to me and determined to help families avoid the kind of breakdown we had experienced. "Aunt Ellie," he said during one conversation, "I want to work with people who have been forgotten or pushed aside. What happened to you? It shouldn't happen to anyone. Sometimes, good things come from bad experiences," I told him. "Watching snow fall outside my apartment window. Sometimes, we have to lose one family to find another." The Christmas card arrived on a Tuesday in December, slipped under my door while I was at my weekly storytelling group. I found it when I returned, a cream-colored envelope with my name written in Sarah's careful script. Inside was a simple card with a winter landscape, no glitter or elaborate design. The message was brief. "I think about you every day. I know I cannot undo what I did. But I want you to know, I remember now. I remember who raised me, who sacrificed for me, who loved me unconditionally. I am sorry it took losing you to remember who you were. Love always, Sarah." I read it twice, then placed it in the wooden box where I kept Robert's letters and our wedding photos and the few mementos I would brought from the cabin. Some words come too late to change anything, but they still deserve a place in the story. I didn't write back. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound like forgiveness or bitterness, and I felt neither. What I felt was completion, the sense that a chapter had ended and a new one was beginning. The reporter found me 3 months later. Jennifer Walsh was a young woman from the Denver Post working on a feature about inheritance disputes and family estrangement. Somehow she had heard about the wedding incident. These things have a way of circulating in social circles, especially when they involve dramatic gestures and large sums of money. "Mrs. Patterson," she said, over coffee in the sunny Vista dining room, "your story has resonated with a lot of people who have reached out to our paper. Women who feel invisible in their own families, parents who have been discarded after years of sacrifice. Can you tell me what you would want them to know?" I thought about the question while I stirred honey into my tea, watching golden swirls dissolve into amber liquid. I would want them to know that dignity isn't something other people give you. It is something you protect, something you refuse to surrender, no matter how much easier it might be to just go along with being diminished. Even if protecting that dignity means walking away from people you love. Especially then, love isn't possession. It is not something you can demand or manipulate someone into giving you. Real love requires respect, and respect requires recognizing someone's worth. But some people would say that family obligations are different, that children don't owe their parents gratitude or inclusion in their lives just because of what their parents did for them. I nodded. Considering her point, they are right. Children don't owe their parents anything beyond basic human decency. But parents don't owe their children anything beyond basic human decency either. Love is a gift, not an obligation, and gifts can be withdrawn when they are not valued. The article ran on Mother's Day with the headline, "The Mother Who Chose Herself." It included photos of me in my apartment and quotes from the foundation about the Elder Dignity Program. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of letters from women with similar stories, social workers requesting information about our programs, and even a few calls from adult children who would read the article and recognize themselves in Sarah's behavior. I answered every letter personally, sharing what I had learned about setting boundaries and protecting dignity and the difference between love and obligation. Each response reminded me that my experience wasn't unique, that families across the country were struggling with similar issues of respect and recognition, and the complicated dynamics of aging parents and ambitious children. One letter came from a woman in Texas whose daughter had excluded her from the birth of her first grandchild because her apartment wasn't suitable for visitors. Another from a mother in Maine whose son had asked her not to attend his law school graduation because she wouldn't fit in with his classmates' families. Each story broke my heart and reminded me that choosing myself hadn't been selfish. It had been necessary. The Foundation's work continued to expand. We started support groups for estranged parents, legal aid for elderly people facing financial manipulation from their children, and emergency housing for seniors abandoned by their families. Every program felt like a small victory against the culture of disposal that seemed to affect so many families. Spring came early that year to Colorado Springs. I was tending tomato plants on my balcony, a hobby I had never had time for when I was working, and raising Sarah, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "Eleanor, it is Catherine, Derek's aunt. We met at the wedding." I set down my watering can and leaned against the balcony railing, looking out at the mountains in the distance. "Hello, Catherine. I am calling because I thought you should know. Sarah and Derek are getting divorced." I felt nothing at the news. No satisfaction, no sadness. Just a kind of neutral acknowledgement that lives continue to unfold whether we are part of them or not. "I am sorry to hear that. Derek's been having an affair with his business partner's wife, Sarah. Found out last month. The whole thing's been very messy." "That is unfortunate." Catherine seemed surprised by my lack of reaction. "She has been asking about you, Eleanor, wondering if there is any chance you might be willing to see her, to maybe work things out." I watched a hawk circle over the community garden, riding thermal currents with the kind of effortless grace that comes from knowing exactly where you belong in the world. "Catherine, I rebuilt my life after Sarah made it clear. I wasn't welcome in hers. I am not interested in going backward. She is struggling, Eleanor. She is living in a studio apartment now, working as a substitute teacher. All of Derek's family money was tied up in the business. And with the divorce proceedings, are you asking me to help her financially? I just thought maybe family means something when everything else falls apart." "Family," I said quietly, "is what Sarah decided I wasn't. You cannot discard someone when it is convenient, and then expect them to be there when you need them. She was young when she made those choices. People make mistakes." She was 32 years old at that wedding. Catherine, old enough to know better, old enough to understand the consequences of her choices. I hung up and went back to my tomatoes. The divorce was finalized that summer. I read about it in the Denver Society pages. A brief mention that Derek Williamson and Sarah Patterson Williamson had ended their 3-year marriage. Sarah had returned to her maiden name. I felt sorry for her in an abstract way. Divorce is never easy, and discovering betrayal cuts deep regardless of your other circumstances. But I had learned the difference between sympathy and involvement, between caring about someone's well-being and feeling responsible for fixing their problems. My new life continued to unfold in ways I couldn't have imagined. I started dating Walter Peterson, a retired high school principal who lived 2 floors up and had a laugh that reminded me of Robert's. We took cooking classes together at the community center, went on bus trips to art museums in Denver, and spent our evenings reading on my balcony while watching the mountains change color with the sunset. Walter knew my story. Everyone at Sunny Vista did, thanks to the newspaper article and the foundation work. But he never pushed me to reconcile with Sarah, or suggested that I was too harsh in my judgment. "Some bridges," he said one evening, as we watched clouds gather over the peaks, "are meant to stay burned." It is not about revenge or holding grudges. It is about accepting that some relationships have run their course and trusting your own judgment about what you need in your life. The second letter from Sarah arrived in September, 2 years after the first. This one was longer, more desperate, written on cheap paper that suggested her circumstances had indeed changed dramatically. "Mom, I know I have no right to ask anything of you. I know what I did was unforgivable, but I am lost. Derek left me with nothing, and I cannot even afford my rent next month. I have been thinking about those apple turnovers you used to make for special occasions, about the way you had hum while you cleaned the house on Saturday mornings. I miss the sound of your voice. I miss feeling like I belonged somewhere. Is there any way, any possibility that we could try again? I don't need money. I just need to know that someone in the world still cares whether I succeed or fail. I read the letter standing in my kitchen. Sunlight streaming through the windows and illuminating the small herb garden I had planted on the windowsill. For a moment, I remembered the little girl who used to help me bake those turnovers, standing on a step stool with flour on her nose and chocolate chips sneaked when she thought I wasn't looking. But then I remembered the woman at the wedding reception, who had stood by while another person was introduced as her stepmother, who had watched me be dismissed and marginalized without saying a word. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the box with the first one and all my other important papers. Some things cannot be undone, no matter how much someone regrets them. Some words, once spoken, change everything forever. I didn't write back. 3 years have passed since Sarah's wedding. I am 71 now, healthy and content in my apartment overlooking the community garden. The foundation work continues to thrive, helping dozens of elderly people reclaim their dignity and financial security. We have expanded to include programs in 3 states, and there is talk of going national. Tommy graduated from college last spring and got engaged to a lovely girl named Maria, who works as a nurse in the pediatric ICU. They asked me to be part of their wedding, not as a replacement mother or a courtesy inclusion, but as an honored guest whose presence they genuinely valued. I am helping Maria plan the reception menu, and yes, I am making apple turnovers for the dessert table. You are like the grandmother I always wished I had, Maria told me when we were testing recipes in my kitchen. Tommy says, you are the strongest person he has ever known. Strength, I am still learning what that word means. Still discovering that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away from people who don't value what you are offering. Walter and I spend our evenings reading together on the balcony, watching the mountains change color as the sun sets behind the peaks. We are planning a trip to Ireland next spring, something I never thought I would do, never imagined I would want. But this new life has brought unexpected possibilities, unexpected joys that I might never have discovered if I had continued trying to fit into a space that was never meant for me. Sometimes, I think about Sarah. I wonder if she is happy, if she has learned anything from the collapse of her perfect life, if she has found people who value her for who she really is, rather than who she is trying to become. I hope she has. I hope she has discovered that authentic relationships are worth more than impressive appearances. But I don't wonder enough to reach out. I don't love her less, but I love myself more now. And that has made all the difference. The storytelling group meets tonight, and I am sharing a new story about a woman who learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is walking away. About the difference between being needed and being valued. About the courage it takes to choose dignity over sentiment. The thing about respect, I will tell them, is that you cannot demand it from others until you demand it from yourself. You cannot expect people to value what you give them until you value it enough to stop giving it to people who take it for granted. If this story found you, if you have ever felt invisible in your own family, or overlooked by people who should cherish you, then you understand the weight of silence and the power of finally speaking up. Maybe you are the mother who gives and gives until there is nothing left, watching your sacrifices be dismissed as inconvenient history. Maybe you are the grandmother whose wisdom gets dismissed as outdated, whose presence gets managed rather than celebrated. Maybe you are the person everyone expects to be grateful for scraps when you deserve a place at the table. Her light is here to remind you that your story matters, that your dignity is worth protecting, and that sometimes love means knowing when to let go. We are here to tell you that you don't have to accept being erased from your own narrative, that you don't have to smile and stay quiet while someone rewrites your importance out of their story. Subscribe, because when women speak their truth, mountains move and worlds change. Share your stories in the comments. We read every one and honor every voice. Until next time, remember, you are worthy of respect, you deserve to be valued, and you get to decide who earns a place in your life. The light is yours to share, and no one gets to dim it but you.